They lied about me, turned everyone against me, and destroyed my life while laughing, so I stayed quiet, let them get comfortable, and took my revenge. Years later, in a way they never recovered from. 5 years ago, I was accused of SA at work. I was never arrested. I was never charged. There was no case. None of that mattered. The accusation alone ended my career, my relationship, and most of my social circle in a matter of days. If you've never watched people decide you're dangerous before you even understand what's happening, it's hard to explain how fast it moves. I worked in a prestige-heavy government-adjacent corporate environment where reputation mattered more than performance. I was senior enough to be visible, but not senior enough to be protected. I had a reputation for being difficult in a specific way. I documented everything. I asked questions people didn't like. And I didn't accept, "This is how we've always done it," as an answer. I wasn't political. I didn't play favorites. That was fine until it wasn't. 2 colleagues, who I'll call A and B, were junior to me and very ambitious. They were also sloppy. Over several months, I noticed expense patterns that didn't make sense. Small things at first, then larger ones. Conference costs that didn't line up, reimbursements that kept skirting thresholds, approvals that were rushed through the same channels. I flagged it internally and asked for a formal review. Nothing dramatic, no accusations, just documentation and a request to look closer. 2 weeks later, I was accused of inappropriate physical contact at a conference. The allegation was vague. No witnesses, no specific time beyond during the event. The problem was, I wasn't even where they said I was at the time they implied. My travel records showed that clearly, but no one asked for them. HR suspended me the same day the complaint landed. My laptop was taken, my access was cut. I was told not to contact anyone and not to defend myself publicly because it could interfere with the process. By the end of that week, people I'd worked with for years stopped responding to messages. Friends avoided me without explanation. My partner packed their things and left without a conversation. I didn't even get the dignity of an argument. The only thing anyone said, indirectly, was that they needed space. It was obvious almost immediately that the accusation wasn't being treated as a question. It was being treated as a conclusion. HR didn't ask me to walk through my timeline. Legal didn't ask for context. The institution closed ranks around optics. I was radioactive. Being near me was a liability. What hit me hardest wasn't the suspension, it was realizing how clean the timing was. The expense review I requested stalled the moment the complaint appeared. Everything I raised went quiet. A and B suddenly became the people handling my former projects. They were presented as steady hands stepping up in a difficult situation, and I could have fought loudly. I could have gone scorched earth right then. I didn't. Not because I was scared, and not because I believed the system would protect me. I stayed quiet because I understood exactly how this worked. Any emotional reaction would be used as proof that I was unstable. Any public defense would be framed as intimidation. Silence was the only move that didn't immediately make things worse. So I documented everything. I requested records. I saved timelines. I wrote down dates and names and decisions while it was still fresh. I watched as the label stuck. People stopped using my name. I became a warning story, someone you referenced carefully. The internal process dragged on and then fizzled out in the most damaging way possible. No finding, no resolution, just separation. No wrongdoing established, but no exoneration either. The worst possible outcome, because it let everyone keep believing whatever they wanted. I left the industry shortly after, not because I wanted to start over, but because there was no room left to stand. Recruiters stopped calling. Old contacts went cold. I moved cities. I took work that didn't require anyone to Google me. For a long time, that was it. I focused on rebuilding something that didn't depend on trust I no longer had. I didn't correct people. I didn't chase apologies. I let the story calcify because I needed it settled before I could touch it again. Last week, someone who used to work adjacent to my old department emailed me asking if I remembered a specific internal report from years ago. One I wrote. One that apparently resurfaced during an audit. That message was the first time I allowed myself to look back without anger. I'm writing this now because what happened after I left is finally public in a way it never was for me. I stayed quiet while my name did its damage. I let them get comfortable. What came next took years, and it wasn't clean, and it didn't give me my life back. But it did end the lie. I'll write about that next. Update 1. Continuation post from my first one. When I left my job, I assumed the accusation lived in a single document somewhere. A complaint, a file, something ugly but contained. I was wrong. What they built wasn't an allegation, it was a character. I got access to the internal complaint through someone who shouldn't have sent it to me but did anyway. It wasn't one statement, it was two, submitted separately by A and B, and they read like they were written by the same person. Same phrases, same emotional beats, same careful language that sounds concerned without saying anything that could be pinned down. Patterns instead of facts, feelings instead of details. The same warning lines about how people like me hide in plain sight. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. These weren't two people describing the same experience. This was one narrative split in half to look organic. What made it worse was realizing how rehearsed it all was. I learned later that B had helped A prepare before filing, not just emotionally, but structurally. What to emphasize, what to avoid, how to describe discomfort without naming an act, how to say enough to trigger policy, but not enough to risk scrutiny. A didn't just accuse me, they performed the role they knew the institution was trained to respond to. HR never questioned the overlap. Legal never flagged the identical phrasing. No one asked why two people who worked closely together suddenly produced mirror statements. The goal wasn't to find out what happened. The goal was to move the risk away from the company as fast as possible. I was the risk. After that, everything accelerated. I wasn't just suspended. I was framed as a known issue. People were quietly advised not to be alone with me. Meetings I'd been scheduled for were reassigned without explanation. I stopped being invited to anything that wasn't mandatory. It happened so fast it felt coordinated, because it was. Outside of work, it spread in a different way. Friends didn't confront me. They didn't ask what happened. They just pulled back. Texts stopped. Invitations dried up. A few people unfollowed me everywhere in the same week. Someone I'd known for years crossed the street to avoid me. No one said the word, but everyone knew what I was supposed to be. My family got a softer version of the same pressure. They were told to give me space, to let the process play out, to protect themselves. That last part hurt more than I expected. I wasn't even there to argue. I was already written off. What I didn't know at the time was what was happening behind the scenes. While I was being erased, A and B were being elevated. They took over my projects. They were praised for stepping up during a difficult situation. They were described as stabilizing forces. The expense review I'd flagged disappeared completely. No follow-up, no reassignment, just gone. I learned later that they were promoted within months. Quietly, but significantly. Titles changed. Access expanded. The same people who told me not to defend myself publicly were applauding their professionalism in handling adversity. That was the moment something in me shifted. Not because I wanted revenge right then, but because I understood the scale of what they'd done. This wasn't panic. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was opportunistic and deliberate. They didn't just remove me. They replaced me and used my removal as proof of their own integrity. The industry reaction was immediate and permanent. Recruiters stopped calling. Applications went unanswered. Former colleagues stopped replying entirely. I heard through someone else that my name came with a warning now, not a story. Just a label. I spent a long time sitting with that, watching how easily it all held together without me. I didn't argue. I didn't post anything. I didn't leak documents. I didn't even correct people who repeated lies to my face. I let it harden. What I did do was start filing preservation requests. Not accusations, not complaints, just formal notices asking that certain records be retained. Emails, expense logs, travel data, internal messages, the boring stuff no one thinks about until it's gone. I asked for them quietly and methodically, knowing most people would ignore the significance. This was the point where revenge stopped being theoretical. Not because I wanted to hurt them emotionally, but because I saw the system clearly for the first time. It didn't care about truth. It cared about risk. And risk changes when the wrong kind of attention shows up. I didn't know how long it would take. I didn't know exactly how it would end. I just knew that if they were willing to build a lie this big, they were hiding more than one thing. And eventually, hiding gets sloppy. I stayed quiet. I let them get comfortable. I didn't disappear on purpose at first. I just stopped being employable. Once your name is attached to an allegation like that, nobody wants to be the one who takes a chance on you. It doesn't matter that there were no charges. It doesn't matter that nothing went to court. The silence does the work for them. People fill in the blanks themselves. I burned through my savings faster than I expected. Legal advice, therapy I didn't stick with, moving costs, and months of not working added up. I stopped correcting people when they made vague comments about why I was between roles. I realized early on that denial made people uncomfortable. Letting them assume made it easier for them to move on, and easier for me to be left alone. What I did keep doing was collecting things, not evidence in the dramatic sense, just records, emails that still existed in my inbox, calendar entries, travel receipts, notes I'd written to myself when everything was fresh and I still thought someone would care. I backed them up in places I didn't touch again. I didn't send them to journalists. I didn't post them anywhere. I learned very quickly that truth without power is just noise. About a year after I was pushed out, a former colleague reached out quietly, not to apologize. He wanted advice. He'd moved into a compliance-adjacent role at a small firm that did external consulting for large institutions, the kind that came in after things had already gone wrong. He remembered I was good at controls and process reviews, and that I didn't ask a lot of questions out loud. I took the contract work because it was anonymous and paid enough to keep me afloat. That's how I came back in, from the side. No title anyone would recognize, no internal email address, just someone who reviewed documents and flagged issues for other people to raise. I wasn't a decision maker, I was invisible, which turned out to be useful. Over time, I saw the same names come up again. A and B had done well for themselves. Promotions, bigger budgets, more responsibility. The work they were overseeing was sloppier than before, but nobody challenged them. They had reputations now. They were the kind of people institutions like to point to as proof they took allegations seriously and rewarded the right behavior. The fraud hadn't stopped. It had gotten lazier. Larger amounts, fewer attempts to hide patterns. The same vendors cycling through, invoices that rounded too neatly, approvals that happened too fast. The kind of thing that gets ignored when the people signing off are trusted and nobody wants to look like they're undermining a success story. I didn't accuse them of anything. I asked neutral questions. I requested clarification on processes that should have been clear already. I suggested they document decisions more thoroughly, framed as protecting themselves. I watched them do exactly what people always do when they think they're smarter than the system. They explained too much. They corrected things retroactively. They put things in writing that should never have been written down. At the same time, I started a separate process that had nothing to do with them on the surface. I submitted sworn statements to the appropriate bodies outlining how the original allegation against me had been handled internally. I didn't lead with emotion. I didn't claim malicious intent. I laid out timelines, procedural failures, and inconsistencies. I noted where records were missing and where decisions deviated from policy. I framed it as a governance issue. Institutions understand that language. Nothing happened right away. That was expected. These things move slowly until they don't. What changed was jurisdiction. Once external regulators were involved for financial reasons, everything else stopped being an internal matter. Emails that HR had been happy to ignore suddenly mattered. Messaging records that had been dismissed as irrelevant were pulled in full. Statements made years earlier were compared side by side. The story that had been good enough for an internal memo didn't hold up when people were answering under oath. I stayed out of sight the entire time. I wasn't the whistleblower in the way people imagine. I was just another consultant whose name appeared in footnotes. I didn't contact A or B. I didn't need to. They were too busy dealing with auditors who didn't care about their feelings or their reputations. There's a moment when you've been written off for long enough where you stop wanting vindication and start wanting closure of a different kind. I didn't need an apology. I needed the record to reflect what actually happened. I needed the thing that destroyed my life to be expensive to maintain. I knew how this would end months before it did. Once fraud crosses into criminal territory, everything connected to it gets re-examined. False statements stop being PR problems and start being legal ones. Allegations that were convenient before become liabilities. I'm writing this now because it's no longer hypothetical. The process is public. I'm still not named, and that's fine. The people who mattered know. The people who didn't believe me don't reach out anymore, which is also fine. Update 2. I knew things were moving before anyone told me. Institutions get quiet right before they panic. Emails slow down. Meetings get postponed without explanation. People who were confident a few months earlier stop putting their names on documents. That's when you know something tipped from manageable to dangerous. The first crack wasn't public, it was procedural. An external investigative team requested original source data tied to the conference where the allegation supposedly happened. Not summaries, not HR notes, raw records, travel logs, access badges, hotel key usage, internal messaging metadata, things HR had never bothered to reconcile because they didn't need to. The story had already done its job. The timeline didn't survive contact with reality. I wasn't where they said I was. My badge didn't register in the building during the window they claimed. My phone was logged on a different network across town. A's own calendar contradicted her written statement. B's messages showed real-time coordination about what to include and what to leave vague. Nothing dramatic, just enough small inconsistencies that added up to intent. Once investigators see coordination, everything else gets reclassified. What had been treated as a sensitive internal complaint became a potential false statement issue. That's a hard turn for people who built careers on the assumption that no one would ever look too closely. At the same time, the financial investigation stopped being theoretical. The amounts were no longer something that could be settled quietly. Vendors were subpoenaed, accounts were frozen. The pattern I'd noticed years earlier was now laid out in spreadsheets by people whose job was to make cases stick. It wasn't creative, it was boring fraud, repetitive, arrogant, and very well documented once someone bothered to document it. The moment everything went public wasn't dramatic either. It was a filing, charges listed in plain language, fraud, conspiracy, false statements, names attached, no mention of me. That part mattered more than I expected. I didn't want to be the story. I wanted the lie to collapse under its own weight. Media picked it up because it checked all the right boxes: rising stars, institutional failure, suppressed complaints. There were photos pulled from old press releases, the kind where people smile too hard. Their past interviews got reprinted with new context. The same outlets that had once praised how seriously the organization took misconduct allegations now had to explain why obvious contradictions were ignored. That's when HR became part of it. Not because they were malicious, but because they were careful in the wrong way. Emails showed decisions to bypass standard review steps, notes about minimizing exposure, language about reputational risk that sat uncomfortably next to claims of neutrality. A few executives resigned before they were asked to, others didn't get the chance. My own case was reopened quietly. I wasn't consulted beyond confirming records already on file. The finding came back the way I always knew it would if anyone actually looked. The allegation was deemed malicious, not unsubstantiated, not inconclusive, malicious, coordinated and timed to interfere with an internal review. That distinction matters in ways that only show up later. Apology letters followed, from the institution, from people who hadn't spoken to me in years, carefully worded, legally reviewed, and completely useless. I didn't respond. I didn't need closure from the same system that had erased me without hesitation. Silence had worked for me once. I wasn't about to break it now. The strangest part was how quickly everyone adjusted. People who had avoided eye contact when my name came up now spoke about the situation in the abstract, as if it had nothing to do with their own choices. Careers continued. LinkedIn profiles updated. The machine moved on, just with fewer people inside it. The only direct contact came through a channel I hadn't thought about in a long time. A message request routed through a third party. It was custody limits how people communicate, but it doesn't stop them entirely. I didn't open it. I didn't need to know what it said. There was nothing left to negotiate, and nothing she could offer that mattered. Blocking the number felt anticlimactic. No surge of satisfaction. No relief. Just confirmation that the part of my life where I waited for explanations was over. I'm aware of how this reads. People like a clean arc. Innocent person vindicated, wrongdoers punished. Lesson learned. That's not how it felt from the inside. It felt slow and clinical, and strangely impersonal. The system didn't correct itself because it cared about me. It corrected itself because the lie became too expensive to maintain. That's the part I want people to understand. Not because I'm looking for sympathy, but because this isn't rare. It just doesn't usually end this way. Most people don't have the time, distance, or lack of attachment required to wait it out. I did, and once it started falling, there was nothing left to hold it up. Final update. This will be my last post. Not because there's nothing left to say, but because I'm done watching this from the sidelines. The cases are over. Not pending, not appealed, not quietly deferred. Over. Sentences handed down, bans imposed, licenses revoked. A and B won't work in this field again, or anything adjacent to it. The fraud convictions did what the allegation never could. It stripped them of credibility in a way no internal memo ever would. The irony isn't lost on me. The institution settled without admitting fault. That part was predictable. They wanted it contained, documented, and buried under confidentiality clauses. I agreed to most of it because I didn't want to spend the next decade arguing about intent with people who still wouldn't admit what they did. The compensation was significant. Not life-changing in a movie sense, but enough to close a chapter properly. Enough to stop calculating what things cost me. I never went back, not even as a consultant, not even for appearances. I declined every invitation that came with a rebuilding trust angle. The truth is, I don't trust any system that needs a scandal this big to do the bare minimum. Walking away was the only part of this that felt like a choice. People have reached out in waves. Former colleagues, friends who disappeared when my name became inconvenient, a few family members who decided distance was safer than loyalty. Most of them want to talk about how shocking everything was, how no one could have known, how glad they are that the truth came out. I don't respond, not out of spite, but because there's nothing to rebuild. What broke wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a pattern. There were consequences I didn't plan for. Some people who defended A and B aggressively found themselves under scrutiny too. Not charged, but exposed enough that their careers stalled. I'm aware that not all of them were malicious. Some were just loud and confident and wrong. I didn't intervene. I also didn't feel responsible. Choosing a side without evidence is still a choice. I'm often asked if it was worth it. Not directly, but you can hear it in how people phrase things. If the years of isolation, the paranoia, the slow rebuild were a fair price for this ending, I don't frame it that way. I didn't trade one life for another. I lost one and built something else in the space it left behind. The revenge part didn't feel like fireworks. It felt administrative. Emails, filings, waiting, watching timelines collapse under documentation. The satisfaction people expect never really showed up. What did show up was a sense of finality, a quiet understanding that I was no longer frozen in the worst version of myself that other people invented. I don't pretend I came out clean. I learned how little empathy I had left for anyone standing in the way of the truth. I let systems hurt people when it suited my goal. I didn't correct narratives until correcting them caused maximum damage. That sits with me, not heavily, but honestly. If there's anything I want people to take from this, it's not hope, it's caution. Institutions don't protect truth, they protect themselves. Allegations don't need to be proven to be useful, they just need to be timed well. And once a lie becomes part of a process, undoing it requires more than innocence, it requires leverage. I have a life now that doesn't resemble the one that was taken from me. Different work, fewer people, less noise. I don't introduce myself with my past, and I don't correct anyone who doesn't know it. Being unknown again is a privilege I didn't appreciate before. This account won't be active after this. I've said what I needed to say, and the rest belongs to court records and people who will never read this anyway.